Already my voice sounds a lot better than the first take I made of this, because less sick now than I was a week ago. It's a scale. Welcome back to Crypt. So I mentioned before my anxiety, but to be perfectly honest, it's pretty common for most people to be at least nervous when their creative works are critiqued by others. And while you'd think that going through creative writing courses and going through this feedback multiple times myself would have somehow purged me of the fear, the reality is I am still really, really nervous to have my stuff put out there for people to criticize, and I definitely am not alone on that. Even though a large portion of my fear is due to probably my anxiety disorder hiding it, as well as possible neurodivergency and rejection sensitivity dysphoria, at the end of the day, most people do not super enjoy being critiqued. Like, they've learned to either live with it or learn to enjoy the outcome of it, like bettering themselves, but the actual process of being critiqued is not fun for the majority of writers. So this entire series is walking through a lot of my fears and talking about ways that I've coped, which may or may not be helpful because everyone's different, but I just kind of wanted to walk through this kind of stuff because it's not talked about enough, I don't think. People know you need this stuff, but just like editing, I feel like this part of the process is very much glazed over, and it's a major part of being an artist. Now, I want to be very clear that you can be a writer and not get feedback. That's controversial, but you can. It's just you can't be very good at having your work published and get away with it. Because if you're going to publish, even if you do not wish yourself to get feedback, at some point you're going to receive it from a customer. Versus if you write for your own personal enjoyment and you either don't publish it anywhere or you publish it somewhere with a lot of blocks or like, you know, people really can't comment on it, then yeah, you're probably not going to get feedback for that. But if you are going to publish in any capacity, you're going to receive feedback. Whether you will it or no, at some point it will happen. It's an inevitability, but it is attached to being published pretty much. Fear of the unknown is one of the things that just paralyzes me a lot of the times. So even though I know in theory what feedback is, and I've gone through feedback groups for years, for the sake of making sure we really nail the definition, I'm going to go through a couple definitions of what this is, all the way from very clinical dictionary stuff and what other authors and writers see it. So according to a basic definition, I just Googled the term feedback. Information about reactions to a product, a person's performance of a task, etc., which is used as a basis for improvement. Now remember that last part because I feel like that's going to be real key and it's going to be like the thread that attaches literally everything. So now I'm going to read a quote from author Gideon Lewis Crass, author of Sense of Direction. Well, I'm one of those people who hears criticism and immediately gets defensive and thinks, but that's not what I meant. Part of learning to take criticism well is the understanding that to be a writer is to be in the business of communication. And if something doesn't come across the way you meant it to, you have two options. One is to decide that the critic is an idiot, which is sometimes true, but is an inert lesson. The other is to decide that obviously you haven't done what you needed to do to communicate clearly. And with any luck, you can draw a lesson from that to help you write differently in the future. Once again, we're looking like every single thing you get back that qualifies as feedback must move your art craft forward in some way. When I see anything that could possibly be perceived as feedback, I put it under one of three categories. The first one is pretty obvious. It's obviously meant to do good. If I had a short story about frogs, I actually think I do. Anyway, and it's a whole thing. They're magic frogs. They talk. It's a thing. But if I had feedback for that short story, for example, a really clear bit of feedback would be, I really enjoyed the beginning portion of this, but by the middle of the story, I had a hard time following the decisions of your main character. I didn't understand why they made the decisions they did. I feel like it was really two characters instead of one, and it was a bit confusing. That is excellent feedback. I know from that feedback that there is a major problem with the development of my main character in the middle of the story. Development that I thought was really obvious, clearly wasn't written clearly enough, and that's something I need to fix to make it easier to follow for the reader. Or it's possible there are two characters disguising themselves as one character in a trench coat, and I need to separate both of those characters and make them two distinct personalities. Regardless, I know there's a problem. I know the major bit of the problem rears its ugly head in the second act of that story, and that's where I need to focus my attention. That is fantastic feedback. And I just want to specify right here now while I'm here that in my opinion, feedback does not have to use the sandwich method. The sandwiching method is having a good thing to say, then a bad thing, then ending with a good thing. I try to do this in feedback that I give to others because I am a teacher and I understand how daunting it is to do this stuff, and I work with a lot of very young writers, like really young. We're talking either kids or people freshly out of college, like they have almost no experience. So for me, I'd rather be very gentle, but I have gotten really great feedback that is not sandwich, where people just go in for my throat. I've had people say, hey, your ending is trash, and this is why. And they detail why. They give me why, and that is legitimate feedback. It doesn't have to be nicely put to be a legitimate feedback. It's just gonna hit a lot harder, and it's gonna hurt a lot more, and so I'm probably gonna need to recover more before I can actually implement it. But that is legitimate feedback, and I just want to really specify that. Now, for you personally, whether or not you can handle that or how you handle it is your thing, and I will eventually talk about how I handle things that hit me really hard. That is part of the series. So this second one is somewhere in between. I'm not given tons of information for improvement, but I get like little bits of granules here or there that I can use to improve my story. Going back to the short story about frogs example, if someone were to give me feedback saying, I don't really get why you used frogs, but yeah, the ending's really boring to me. Not much, honestly. I can pull something out of it. I can pull out that maybe the choice of the word may be weird. That I can kind of disregard, that's personal preference. But the ending being bad, again, is really vague. I don't know, bad in what way? Like, I don't know. I need more information, but at the very least I have placement. Something's off about the ending that didn't connect to this reader. Now, for this kind of feedback, I usually dismiss it unless more than one person comes up with similar thoughts. Like, I get a lot of people saying that the ending didn't hit properly, then I'm gonna actually count that as feedback. It's still really vague, doesn't give me a lot to work on, but it does specify that there was a specific part in which the reader disconnected. And then we have the third kind, which isn't really feedback at all. It's usually comments that masquerade as feedback. Like, usually the person will get mad and say, well, I'm just giving you feedback, when really they're just hating on you to hate on you. So going back to the frog example, if someone just says, your story is trash and you wasted a ton of time talking about frogs, there's not much you can get out of that. The only thing you could get out of that kind of feedback is to not write a story about frogs or to stop writing altogether. Both of which don't really help you to improve the story you have. They just encourage you to give up. So in that sense, if anything's telling you to give up, if anything's like, you should never write again, like those kinds of comments, those are trash comments. They can be disregarded with no fear whatsoever. I will say that some people will disguise it a little heavier. Like, I have a video, I'll link it up above, of me going through the time that in college that someone ripped apart my short story. The main criticism was like, you should stop writing like this. You should just write pure dialogue because it's the best way to write, and then you go from there. Like, if someone does something like that where they're implying that you have to write exactly how they write in order to make art, that is another trash comment masquerading as it's someone who wants to be acknowledged as a mentor figure but doesn't know how to mentor people at all. It could be that you're not entirely sure which one of those three a comment falls under. I've had that too, where a comment kind of flip-flops between and kind of weaves between different points. Usually what I do is I journal about it, and I make two columns. The first column is where I put the comment itself. I write it verbatim exactly as the comment was. And then on the opposite column, I write down the ideas for change or improvement I get out of that comment. So if you ever feel guilt, like maybe I'm being too sensitive, try that column method. It's helped me a lot, because chances are if I'm just having that knee-jerk reaction, don't want to hear it, but it is good information, when I do this, I have ideas I pulled out of it. I don't want to hear them, and I probably don't want to do them because it's going to be lots of work, but if I get enough ideas for improvement out of a comment, it's feedback. Now, whether or not you actually want to go through some of that feedback and like actually put those changes in the work will rely on what those changes are and a lot of other factors, which is very personal to you and your project. But that's how I've kind of differentiated different comments. So I will be talking a little bit about like thinking traps, and because I have a very knee-jerk reaction of rejection and feeling very, very rejected, even though I know people are not rejecting me, they're actually aiding me a lot. They're giving me feedback for a work of art so I can improve, which is a good thing, and it's the thing I do want and I'm very grateful for. But in the moment of receiving that feedback, I tend to have a knee-jerk reaction of feeling horrible, and I have really, really negative self-talk. I will be talking about pulling away and doing self-reflection and using things like thinking traps as ways to work through that. I will be talking about that in the future videos, so if you're interested in that, please hit the subscribe button and the bell notification so you know when those videos go live. And thank you guys so much for hanging out with me while I talked about this stuff. It does help a little bit to hear definitions like that and see them just clean cut. And opinions and feedback are not the same thing. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have a better time of February than I am so far. Don't get sick.